Picture this: a mother, proud and loving, completely unaware that the person she trusts most is the very one responsible for a series of gruesome acts. What happens when the truth is so horrifying that it's impossible to believe? 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey sat in the interrogation room, his boyish face a mask of calm. The detectives thought they were dealing with a troubled teen, brought in for the brutal murder of 98-year-old Margaret Douglas.
I'm sure you guys know about the elderly woman that was found.
Oh my God, that was horrifying. That was horrifying.
But what they didn't know was that sitting across from them was no ordinary suspect. Gavin was a monster in disguise.
With the death of a 98-year-old Wadsworth woman whose body was found inside of her home.
Harboring twisted fantasies far beyond what anyone could imagine. An insatiable hunger for violence. A mind consumed by the darkest desires. And as the questioning began, they had no idea they were staring into the eyes of a killer who found sick pleasure in snuffing out innocent lives. Who was Margaret Douglas? Margaret Mary Frick. Douglas entered the world on September 15, 1919, in the serene countryside village of Akron, Ohio. Being the second oldest of 4 siblings, she gained a reputation for being both generous and fiercely independent. A woman who was confident in her own beliefs and unafraid to defend them. Following World War II, Margaret tied the knot with her soulmate, Donald Douglas. They both established roots in Wadsworth, Ohio, a close-knit suburban community where familiarity among residents and strong community bonds were prevalent. Margaret and Donald never lacked company, even though they decided not to have children. Their lives were filled with warmth and support from family, friends, and neighbors. However, even with the supportive community surrounding her, Margaret always took pride in her independence. Even after Donald's death, she persisted in living independently, managing her daily routine with the same resilience and autonomy that had characterized her for many years. Margaret, who was 98 years old, was still lively and determined, eagerly anticipating her upcoming 100th birthday celebration. However, destiny had a harsh turn prepared. Margaret's aspirations were suddenly and brutally ended, causing Wadsworth to be shocked and disbelieving. The community was in shock as they grieved the death of a woman who had been an important part of their town, which was once known for being a place of security and solace. The feeling of safety that had always characterized Wadsworth was destroyed, substituted by a chilling understanding that even the most tranquil locations can hold unfathomable darkness. The missing person. Howard Leisure, visibly shaken, contacted the local police with an urgent concern. His 98-year-old aunt, Margaret Douglas, had seemingly vanished. A family friend who went to check on Margaret at her Portage Street home found the place empty. Despite a thorough search, there was no trace of her. Howard, deeply worried, told the police that Margaret lived alone and that it was completely out of character for her to disappear like this. The police informed him that there were no reports of anyone matching her description seen around the area, but the situation was clearly alarming. With Margaret's name and address in hand, the police knew they needed to act quickly to uncover what had happened. The peaceful town of Wadsworth, Ohio, was on the verge of encountering a terrifying ordeal. Margaret Douglas, a 98-year-old woman, was reported missing, disappearing without a single clue. Even after extensively looking through her house, authorities did not discover any evidence of a conflict or any indications of her location. The situation was confusing and worrisome. That evening, the police came back to Margaret's house. In a hidden area of the residence, they found a shocking sight: Margaret's dead body. The scene unveiled a more horrifying truth than anyone could have anticipated. Margaret's nightgown was discovered unbuttoned. Injuries on her neck and face showed a violent attack. She was sexually assaulted and then choked to death by the murderer using their hands. The question on everyone's minds was, who would be capable of doing such a terrible thing to a 98-year-old woman in her own house? The suspects initially, the investigation hit a dead end. With each passing day, the trail seemed to grow colder and the case increasingly elusive. However, a series of minor crimes in Margaret Douglas's neighborhood began to attract attention. These incidents of vandalism, while seemingly unrelated, were eventually linked together, suggesting a pattern of criminal behavior. One particular event stood out. A man named Paul reported a harrowing experience he had with a young man he met through the dating app Grindr. They had arranged to meet in Paul's car, but the encounter took a sinister turn. the young man suddenly became violent, forcing Paul out of the vehicle and fleeing with his belongings. The only detail Paul remembered clearly was the strikingly intense blue eyes of his attacker, a detail that seemed both specific and vague. This clue, though not immediately conclusive, prompted the police to dig deeper. Shortly thereafter, reports emerged of two teenagers causing mayhem in the area, running through parking lots and breaking into a construction site. In their haste, they made a critical mistake. They left behind a mobile phone. The phone was quickly traced to a teenager named Zach, who was promptly brought in for questioning. Under the pressure of the investigation, Zach confessed that he wasn't acting alone. He revealed that his partner in crime was Gavin Ramsey, a name that would soon become infamous in Wadsworth. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement began to uncover a disturbing pattern of behavior that suggested Gavin was more than just a petty thief. The unsettling realization emerged that he might be the perpetrator behind the brutal murder of Margaret Douglas. The interrogation Gavin Ramsey, a 17-year-old with a history of minor offenses, entered the interrogation room accompanied by his mother. As the interrogation began, Gavin maintained a calm demeanor but skillfully avoided providing direct answers. Instead, he offered a detailed, albeit seemingly innocuous, account of his recent activities. He described an evening spent wandering around with an elderly acquaintance, which included scaling a church roof and trespassing onto a construction site. Gavin downplayed his involvement, presenting his actions as inconsequential and not indicative of any deeper criminal behavior. The police, however, were intent on digging deeper. They confronted Gavin with mounting evidence linking him to a series of serious crimes in the area. They mentioned a recent car theft, highlighting a suspect described as having striking blue eyes, a detail that alarmingly matched Gavin's appearance. Gavin vehemently denied any involvement, asserting that he would never engage in such behavior and dismissing the accusation as preposterous. As the interrogation progressed, the focus shifted to more specific questions. The officers probed into Gavin's use of the Grindr dating app, particularly because some of the recent victims were known to be gay. They were keen to uncover any possible connection between his activities and the app. Gavin denied ever using Grindr and claimed he held no negative opinions about anyone's sexual orientation. His responses, though detailed, seemed carefully constructed to deflect suspicion and maintain his facade of innocence. The psychological makeup. As the dialogue developed, the topic shifted to the recent killing of an older female, Margaret Douglas. Gavin's response was truly horrified as he communicated his disbelief and sorrow over the crime. He insisted that he had no relationship with the victim and appeared genuinely distraught by the idea of such brutality towards a person of advanced age. Although Gavin seemed troubled, his actions signaled warning signs. The detective used emotional connection, sharing stories and showing empathy in order to establish a connection with Gavin. The purpose of this plan was to motivate him to share and disclose any concealed realities. Gavin's mother, who was originally quiet, started to support the police, showing a common parent response to a child's wrongdoing by showing worry and annoyance. She did not realize how deeply involved her son was or how serious the situation was. During the questioning, Gavin's answers grew more and more contradictory. He acknowledged feeling intense remorse for his behavior and revealed a wish to leave his current situation, even mentioning a preference for residing in a halfway house. He expressed self-hatred and anger, showing that he felt inundated by his errors and the pressure they were causing for his family. The detectives stayed concentrated, closely analyzing Gavin's words and actions to figure out if he was truthful or holding back important details. Their focus was on discovering the truth behind the recent surge of crimes and Gavin's possible role, as well as dealing with his apparent emotional distress and the intricacies of his psychological makeup. The turning point, Gavin Ramsey, with an unsettling calm, requested that his mother and the other police officer leave the interrogation room, signaling a critical moment in the investigation. Alone with the lead detective, Gavin described how he had lured Paul into his car, then locked him out and driven off with his belongings. He claimed he hadn't harmed Paul, only played a cruel prank by leaving him stranded. As the conversation shifted, Gavin vehemently denied any involvement in the murder of Margaret Douglas. He expressed frustration at being accused of such a horrific crime and was visibly angered by the public's perception of him as a dark person. Gavin insisted that he had never been inside Margaret's house and that the accusation was baseless. He even suggested that someone named Hugh, who worked with him, might be a more likely suspect, though he admitted not knowing much about Hugh's background. The detective, probing for more information, discussed the DNA evidence collected from Margaret's home. Gavin seemed indifferent, suggesting that a DNA profile would clear his name if it didn't match the evidence. They confiscated his phone with his mother's permission. Sadly, she had no idea about the disturbing person her son had become. The interrogation revealed a chilling portrait of Gavin, one that contrasted starkly with the image his mother held of him, leaving the detective with a growing sense of unease about Gavin's involvement in Margaret Douglas's tragic death. The evidence Gavin Ramsey harbored a dark obsession that culminated on April 6, 2018. He meticulously documented his gruesome crime, storing the footage in a concealed app ominously named Dark, which was protected by the chilling password, murder. These videos, carefully hidden from the world, captured the horrific events that unfolded that night. Under the cover of darkness, Gavin broke into Margaret Douglas's home through a rear entrance, slipping inside without a sound. He found her asleep on the sofa, unaware of the terror lurking nearby. As he stood there, watching her in those vulnerable moments, Gavin's twisted fantasies came to life. When Margaret suddenly awoke, her eyes wide with fear, Gavin launched a brutal attack. With cold determination, he wrapped his hands around her neck and strangled her to death, relishing the power he felt in taking a life with his own hands. But the horror didn't end with Margaret's death. For hours, Gavin indulged in his sick desires, using her lifeless body in unimaginable ways. He repositioned her corpse, taking photos and videos to capture every detail of his depraved actions. Though he was careful to avoid showing his face, his gloved hand appeared multiple times in the footage, a silent witness to the atrocity. Gavin's meticulous planning unraveled when he made a critical mistake. He left behind one of the gloves he wore during the attack. This seemingly small oversight became the key to solving the case. The glove found at the scene bore Margaret's DNA on the outside and Gavin's on the inside, a damning piece of evidence that sealed his fate. With this irrefutable proof, the authorities were certain they had identified the heartless killer responsible for the brutal murder of a defenseless elderly woman. Second day of interrogation. On the second day of investigation, Gavin was summoned once again for further interrogation. As he entered the room, it became apparent that the situation had taken a toll on him. Expecting the worst, Gavin decided to employ more extreme tactics in his defense. He lay on the floor feigning severe distress, a strategy intended to evoke sympathy or portray himself as someone in deep anguish. The detectives remained unfazed by his theatrics. They knew they needed to keep the pressure on, so they began with casual, almost comforting questions, attempting to lull Gavin into a sense of security. They offered him a drink, trying to create a calm atmosphere, but Gavin's defensive demeanor remained evident. He expressed feelings of despair, lamenting how his life had been ruined, a statement that further reinforced his guilt in the eyes of the investigators. As the questioning progressed, the conversation turned to the events surrounding the crime. Gavin's responses were inconsistent and troubling. He admitted to being involved in an altercation with Margaret, during which her underwear was torn. However, this claim was quickly debunked by the evidence. Her underwear had been torn during a sexual assault, an act captured on a disturbing app found on Gavin's phone. When pressed about the details, Gavin admitted to being on top of Margaret, his hands around her neck, using both hands to strangle her. He described how he had covered her mouth, possibly pushing too hard, causing her to bleed. As he spoke, one of the detectives subtly adjusted his body position, moving closer to the floor to match Gavin's posture. This nonverbal cue was a tactic to encourage Gavin to continue talking, to feel as though the detective was on his level. Gavin's narrative was filled with lies and half-truths. He claimed that Margaret woke up and began to scream after he accidentally made noise by hitting a chair. However, the detectives knew better. Gavin had been inside the house for hours before the murder, a fact that contradicted his claim of only being there for a short time. Despite this, Gavin continued to fabricate details, perhaps hoping that his perceived emotional distress would mask his dishonesty. The conversation shifted to the moments leading up to the crime. Gavin recounted how he had entered the house through the back door, creeping around in the dark. He described the adrenaline rush he felt as he moved through the house, eventually finding Margaret asleep on the couch. When she woke up and reached for her phone, a struggle ensued. Gavin's version of the events was calculated, designed to downplay his culpability, but the detectives remained skeptical. As the discussion continued, Gavin admitted to staying with Margaret's body for about 30 minutes after the murder, sitting in shock and disbelief. Yet, even in this confession, he couldn't resist lying, claiming he had only been in the house for a brief period, when in reality, the evidence showed otherwise. The detectives pressed on, asking about the gloves Gavin wore during the crime. He claimed to have discarded them at home, though one glove was later found at the scene. This inconsistency only furthered the detectives' belief that Gavin was trying to manipulate the narrative. Throughout the interrogation, Gavin alternated between attempts to garner sympathy and moments of apparent clarity where he acknowledged the gravity of his actions. He spoke of his struggles with mental health, describing how his thoughts were darker when he was sober, and how he used substances to escape the reality of his situation. This assumption was further shattered by the discovery of a journal in Gavin's room, filled with daily entries where he fantasized about the gruesome acts of serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy. One chilling entry revealed his dark desires. He expressed a yearning to repeatedly beat someone until they could no longer breathe, and a morbid curiosity about what it would feel like to stand over a dead body. Despite his attempts to shift blame to his emotional state or external factors, the detectives remained focused on the facts, slowly unraveling the truth behind Gavin's lies. The plan. When detectives questioned Gavin, they asked what he would say to Margaret if she were alive and standing in front of him. At first, Gavin appeared to show remorse, apologizing and claiming it was never supposed to happen. However, as he continued speaking, the facade of regret began to crumble, revealing his darker intentions. Gavin confessed that just days before his arrest, he had seriously considered fleeing, even contemplating a move to Tennessee. The plan was born out of his realization that if he ran, he would never be able to return home or speak to his family again. Yet, despite understanding the consequences, Gavin admitted that he knew the truth about Margaret's murder would eventually surface. The detectives pressed him further, asking if he was aware that the situation could have escalated, potentially leading to more violence. Gavin acknowledged this, admitting that if he had gone through with his plan to escape, the situation could have spiraled out of control, possibly resulting in even more harm. While he insisted it wasn't his intention to hurt anyone else, he conceded that it could have happened if circumstances had been different. The conversation ended on a grim note, with both the detectives and Gavin recognizing that things could have been far worse had he not been apprehended. The officers understood they were dealing with someone who had already crossed a dangerous line, and there was a chilling awareness that if left unchecked, Gavin might have done so again. What exactly happened? Gavin Ramsey, a 17-year-old with twisted intentions, silently entered Margaret Douglas's home at night as she slept on her couch. He filmed her vulnerable moments before strangling her to death, fulfilling his desire to kill without a weapon. After her tragic end, he sexually assaulted her lifeless body and confined her in a small closet. Ramsey's depravity continued as he meticulously documented his sickening acts in a file named Dark, with the passcode murder on his phone. He had harbored violent fantasies for months, researching serial killers and planning to murder acquaintances. His descent into darkness left a trail of devastation and unimaginable horror for Margaret's family to discover. Even in death, Ramsey's twisted desires knew no bounds as he used her body to satisfy his perverse urges. As he faced the consequences of his heinous crimes, the true extent of his obsession with violence and death became clear, revealing a calculated and horrifying path of destruction. The sentencing. During Gavin Ramsey's sentencing, his mother, Christine Ramsey, spoke about her son's ongoing mental health issues and her efforts to help him through counseling and medication. Despite these efforts, Patricia Leisure, who was affected by Gavin's actions, labeled him a coward for targeting someone vulnerable. She believed that Gavin's attack on her great-aunt was merely a preliminary act for other, more sinister plans detailed in a notebook he had kept. Medina County Prosecutor S. Forrest Thompson supported a life sentence without the possibility of parole for Gavin Ramsey, emphasizing the need for a punishment that would prevent him from harming anyone else. He urged Judge Joyce Kimbler to impose this sentence, reflecting the gravity of the case. Gavin Ramsey himself apologized in court, struggling to explain his actions. He expressed deep remorse, stating that he would undo his actions if he could, and that he would never commit such acts again. He conveyed a profound sense of regret and shame for his behavior. Ultimately, Judge Joyce Kimbler sentenced Gavin Ramsey to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She deemed him unfit to re-enter society, highlighting the severity of his crimes and the necessity of a sentence that would ensure he could never cause harm again. The end of Gavin Ramsey. After meticulously reviewing all the harrowing evidence, the judge delivered a sentence that seemed to offer some semblance of justice for Margaret Douglas and her devastated family. Gavin Ramsey, the 17-year-old who had brutally taken Margaret's life in a nightmarish crime, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This decision provided a measure of relief to Margaret's grieving loved ones, who were assured that Ramsey would spend the rest of his life behind bars, unable to inflict his twisted desires on anyone else. The criminal justice system had promised to keep Ramsey confined, protecting society from the unimaginable danger he posed. For Margaret's family, this life sentence meant a glimmer of hope that despite their loss, no one else would have to suffer at Ramsey's hands. However, that sense of security was shattered when Ohio lawmakers passed Senate Bill 256, a controversial piece of legislation that mandates parole hearings for juvenile offenders, regardless of the severity of their crimes. This law, designed to offer second chances to young offenders, ignored the heinous nature of Ramsey's actions, might one day walk free. This cruel twist of fate left them feeling betrayed by the very system that had once promised to protect them. The twisted reality behind Gavin Ramsey's heinous acts paints a chilling portrait of a young man whose dark fantasies were tragically brought to life. Margaret Douglas, a beloved figure in her community, became an innocent victim of Gavin's insatiable hunger for violence. The horrors that unfolded in her home not only shattered the tranquility of Wadsworth, but also unveiled a dark side of human nature that is both terrifying and heartbreaking. The shocking revelations from the interrogation room and the damning evidence captured in Gavin's own recordings emphasize the depth of his depravity and the stark contrast between the monstrous reality and the facade he maintained. If you found this story both chilling and compelling, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more unsettling true crime tales. Thanks for watching.